C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. Book 2, Chapter 2, The Invasion. Typical of the author, 4 or 5 pages, but really dense with ideas. He starts off the difference between pantheism and relativism point of view. But he says, very well then, atheism is too simple. He had been an atheist. I agree, atheism, it's simple. And that's often its problem. It tries to simplify what is not a simple universe and give theories, and they're often theories, that are often unfounded on any fact. I think he's saying he didn't find atheism to be something that appealed to him eventually because he wanted to see the universe in a different light. I actually don't know much about his conversion. I don't know if you do.
No, I don't know very much about it. I know what he has said about it, that he was the most reluctant convert in Christendom who came kicking and screaming into the Christian faith. Quite a lot like me in that regard, only he is much more academic and learned than I'll ever be. I think that he is absolutely right, and I think atheism is too simple. What it does is it shuts down all of your critical thinking in many respects, because it just says there is nothing and that's it.
Yeah, and I often think it tries to encompass everything.
Which it can't do.
And it can't. You can't be that simplistic with everything.
Of course you can't. And it doesn't answer any of the philosophical or metaphysical questions of life. And it doesn't answer the why question. Never.
No, that's right. So science, if you looked at a flower, it will tell you the chemical composition of that flower. It could also tell you the actual cycle of reproduction and death and birth. You could look at certain scientific theories and it could tell you how light bends off it. And it will tell you its composites and its weight. But it won't tell you why somebody likes to have them in a vase on a mantelpiece or why some people like to paint them.
Exactly. I think it's a cop-out by many people because it's an easy thing to say, I don't believe in anything, we're just made up of atoms and matter, that's it, and when we die we go into the ground, we rot away and that's it, job done, don't have to think about it. You can just zone yourself out to everything else because nothing else matters. And I don't think that's the way to live life personally.
It's like the guy who comes into a pub and he says, all you over there, no, and all you over there, no. And someone stands up and said, well, I'm not one of this. He said, well, go and stand over there then for the others. Because he also criticises Christianity. He says there is also another view that is too simple. Christianity and water, he calls it. Never heard about that before. A good God in heaven and everything is all right. Now, what we have to consider that as he goes forward, he had just gone through a war, a terrible war. That may colour some of his thinking here and writing. Why would it not? And I'm trying to think when it was originally put together. 1952?
Well, it was a series of talks, wasn't it?
Yeah, because this was printed originally 1952, but I think it was the late 40s, mid to late 40s, he was putting these things as radio programmes. Either way, it's going to be around about the time of the Nuremberg trials, and that's when everything came out about the Holocaust shower. And the world was shocked, and no doubt he would have been in that zeitgeist. He talks about that good God in heaven and everything is all right. So what's the problem with that?
Well, it's just not true, is it? There's a good God in heaven, absolutely, and everything is all right. Well, of course it's not all right, because the creation of this good God is fallen. And so everything is far from all right, which is why this good God stepped out of heaven, self-emptied, stepped onto planet Earth in order to try and bring things right. And I think that one of the fundamental flaws of leading people in the Christian faith is to ever tell them that as soon as you become a Christian, your world will be right. Absolute bull. As soon as you become a Christian, it's like putting your head above the parapet of the trenches and somebody's going to try and shoot your head off. It's dreadful. And so don't ever lead somebody to the Christian faith expecting everything to be all bells and roses and all the rest of it, because that's not reality.
He also then goes on to, and as soon as I read this, it just painted a picture of me of meeting with some Christians who were struggling with the Bible. And one of them, I won't say who because someone may be listening, got out a child's version of the Bible because it was the easiest thing for them to understand. Yet these are very clever people. And he writes about this, says, when you try to explain the Christian doctrine as it is really held by an instructed adult, they then complain that you are making their heads turn round and that it is all too complicated. And if there really were a God, they are sure he would have made religion simple, because simplicity is so beautiful, etc. Now, I'm assuming as a pastor you would come across this.
Yeah, I suppose where I would differ here is I think that the Christian belief is simplicity in itself, because the Christian belief is incredibly simple. It is the belief that God became man.
But do people get simple?
I think that people find simple hard to accept, and it must be more complicated. So I think simple is presented as it is, because the Christian faith is very simple. But then people go, it can't be that simple. I need to overcomplicate it. So now let me attach some bells and whistles, put some hoops for me to jump through, put some hurdles up in front of me so I can struggle and fret and be anxious and be worn out. And that will make me feel like I'm doing something to move into this faith, because it must be harder to achieve than this. And Jesus says, no, mate, it's actually quite simple. And all you need to do is just chill out a little bit about it. I'm not sure that I would agree with that statement of his, if that's the way I've read it correctly, because I think it is simple.
Yeah, normally it would be the other way around. Normally I've come across people who take the simplest thing, but because they may have a position of authority over you, suddenly it's the most complicated thing, and only they know the full answer.
Well, we know that that's what happened with Christianity, because it became the purview of the priests and the clergy to only be the ones who could read the scripture, and only be the ones that could administer this, and only be the ones. Well, that's nonsense. A child can pick it up.
And he also makes a very interesting point at the back end of that statement, because he said you've got to keep your guard against those people, because they'll change their ground all the time. He said, notice too their idea of God making religion simple, as if religion were something God invented. Now that's an interesting statement. I'd not considered that before. Obviously religion is man-made, and woman-made, man-made. But it was God's commandments. And it was Moses who would have received divine inspiration to come up with the Mosaic laws. So you could argue it was God's instructions. What's he trying to say here?
Again, I'm not 100% sure, Mike, to be honest, because I think that religion is a man-made thing, and religion is formed on the statements of God. So the statements of God are made, so God made his statements to Moses. Moses codified them and made a religious movement out of them, which was called Judaism. But God didn't invent religion, I don't think. I would say that he didn't invent religion. And I go back to the point that in terms of Christianity, it is incredibly simple, and it's a way of life, it's not a religion.
Yes, that's a big issue that really came with the Enlightenment. If you look at Isaac Newton, he tried to find an explanation through science for the existence and truth of God. But after him, we got people coming to try and separate them, where you don't get that in the East. They don't separate religion and science in the East. Only in the West. It's artificial.
Yeah. Well, if God infuses everything, then God infuses science, doesn't he?
Absolutely. And those studying it. So what's the problem here? Page 44, he said, effectively, a universe that contains much that is obviously bad and apparently meaningless, but contains creatures like ourselves who know that it is bad and meaningless. There are only two views that face all the facts. One is the Christian view, that this is a good world that has gone wrong, but still retains the memory of what it ought to have been. And the other is dualism, the belief that there are two equal and independent powers at the back of everything, one of them good and another bad, and that this universe is the battlefield in which they fight out an endless war. At this point, I was thinking it's almost like Zoroastrianism here. I personally think that next to Christianity, dualism is the manliest and most sensible creed on the market, but it has a catch.
Yeah.
Infinite regress is the catch. What's behind these dueling powers then?
As he's sort of lining a lot of this stuff up here, he's going to be arguing across this chapter that Christianity offers a unique understanding of evil, not just as an independent force which is opposed to good, which is what we have in dualism, but as a corruption or a perversion of what is good. And he will then build on that, and he will present this Christian belief that evil came into the world through the rebellion of the created order. This world has been invaded. He's talking about a battleground, and so he will talk about this world being invaded by God in the form of Christ. So he rejects, ultimately, doesn't he? He rejects this dualistic approach and his portrayal of evil as a corruption of good, and his emphasis becomes on God's invasion of the world in and through Christ, and dives into that. And then he starts to look at the two against each other, so Christianity versus dualism, what dualism offers, what it presents, good and evil, that they exist eternally, they're opposing forces, and then how Christianity rejects that, affirming that evil isn't just some independent power, but it's actually evil is a distortion of good.
Spoiled goodness.
I think he's somewhere in here that evil's like a parasite and it can't exist without the good because it's a corruption of the good.
He says to be bad, he must exist and have intelligence and will, but existence, intelligence, and will are in themselves good. Therefore, he must be getting them from the good power. Even to be bad, he must borrow or steal from his opponent. And he makes a very interesting point here about that. He says, and now do you begin to see why Christianity has always said that the devil is a fallen angel? Judaism says the same thing as well.
And if evil were truly an equal force, then it'd be self-sustaining. But all evil acts actually borrow from the good. So a tyrant has first got to create order before he can then abuse power. And order is a good thing. And it's when you created order out of the good, you can form the abuse. In fact, Alvin Plantinga, who's one of the leading Christian philosophers in the world, has a book called Free Will Defense. And he argues that evil arises as a byproduct of God granting free will rather than as an independent force. Very interesting philosophy that he has regarding that. Because evil must be a corruption of what is already there. Because evil is not self-sustaining.
Does that then explain the rise of likes of Hitler? It wasn't an exterior force, it was his free will, but he just used it to an extreme end.
Corrupts something that could
spoiled goodness.
Be good, yeah. And so the Christian worldview holds that the universe was originally good, but then created beings, angels, humans, used their free will to rebel against that good. So evil is not a thing in itself, but a perversion of what is good. Like a bit of metal and rust gets on it, and it starts to corrupt the metal, or you get a bit of rot in a bit of wood. It's a corruption of the good. It's a corruption of the wood, it's a corruption of the metal. And so that's where it stems from. Because evil just decays. Evil eats into everything. It eats into people, it eats into their actions, it eats into their emotions, it eats into their thinking. It eats away. It doesn't add, it eats away. It corrupts.
I agree with it. And the interesting thing about the language here, because I think I made a note that Lewis goes quite dark here. He mentions civil war, rebellion, that we're living in a part of the universe occupied by the rebels. So obviously there's a part of the universe that's not, as far as he's saying. I don't know how he knows that, but obviously there's the heavenly court. Enemy occupied territory, that's where this world is. That's quite dark, and I understand why he's painted it that way, because of obviously the war. How would you think otherwise? And there have been periods in time, in our own time, where it got so dark. That's probably the language you're going... If you had to paint it, they're the hues and the tones that you're going to use to express what is inexpressible. Get that? Poetry does it. Lyrics.
Of course.
Perfectly fine. My challenge is to go through, well, do you need to get that dark? But of course, you'll know better than me because you've been in a career in which you have seen that darkness, which I have not.
And I can assure you that the world is very dark.
I feel well protected not knowing that.
But it is also not without a lot of good. And I think Lewis puts it that he obviously uses language which really fits in with everything that he's come out of with the Second World War and all the rest of it. But the world being under the control of a dark power who has led humanity into some sort of rebellion. What I would say is that that Christianity teaches that when Christ came, Lewis describes this as like an invasion, that God has now, if you like, been dropped behind the enemy lines in order to save it. And then when you look at the completed works of Christ, he cries out on the cross, "It is finished." In the Greek he says, "tetelestai," it is finished. And tetelestai was the docket, the receipt, the invoice that you would give when somebody has paid something in full. And it was a very particular cry that he cried out, which is paid in full, and it is the same type of word that was used when you would purchase land back. And it was written on the front and on the back of your receipt. So it's like a title deed. He has paid in full. So while Christ has been dropped in behind enemy lines, the work that he has done is finished. That doesn't mean to say that we're not in an area which is still full of enemy forces, but the battle has actually already been won because he has got the title deed back to the land. He now owns the land once again, but he's still got pockets of resistance that need to be cleared out. Dark powers.
When you explain that, I just kept thinking of the raid on Saint-Nazaire.
Yeah.
I don't know why, because we talked about that recently, didn't we? Which is a very famous raid in World War II by British commandos against the Germans in France.
Indeed it is. And again, this contrasts with the sort of dualistic type view that sees good and evil as being two co-eternal forces. And he also echoes the thoughts of Augustine. So Augustine had a very particular view which was called privatio boni, the privation of the good, which says that evil is not a substance but the absence or the corruption of the good. And so he sort of echoes that.
Interesting theology, and it's very deep at this point. He's edging towards stuff that he shied away from up until this moment.
And just to try and sort of crystallise this, to make it nice and simple to understand, I've talked about rot on a bit of tree and I've talked about rust on a bit of metal. But think about a lie. A lie. The best possible lie is the one that contains truth. And the lie is just a distortion of the truth. So a lie is not its own substance. Rather, it's a distortion of what that substance is, i.e. the truth.
Right. And then he ends up talking, self-referential question. He said, "Do you really mean at this time of day to reintroduce our old friend the devil?" And he says, "Yes, I do."
Yeah. As I've said before, there are people who believe in the devil in everything, and there are people who believe in the devil in nothing. I think that Lewis is very clear in his opinion that there is a power that sits behind the dark power, and that power is personified, and that power is what we would call the devil. Obviously there are caricatures of what the devil is, with the horns, with the hooves, with the flipping pointy pitchfork type thing, and I think that is less than helpful. You've got to remember that if the devil is somebody who is personified, then he's a fallen angel, and as a fallen angel he will be quite beautiful. He will retain much of his glory. He will retain much of his attractiveness. And if you think about all the things that catch our eye, we're like magpies with shiny stuff. We are attracted to the sensual. We are attracted through the eye portal. We are attracted to all of the things that shine bright, the glitz, the glamour, the gold. We're attracted to it. And those things draw us away from God, invariably. I don't see this dark power as being unattractive. Quite the opposite. I see this dark power as being quite beautiful, quite alluring.
Well, one of the most beautiful in myth, admittedly, was Zeus, who became a shower of gold.
Yeah.
And isn't gold the new god in quite a few places?
Yeah, isn't it just?
Mammon.
Mammon, the spirit of mammon. And I think that's the spirit that sits behind the whole of the world. Everybody chases it. Everybody chases wealth. More, me, greed, greed, greed. And so I see the dark power as something that is bizarrely not necessarily dark, but is something that will draw you away from the light. So ultimately it'll end up dark, but it's not a dark thing. You know, if a fallen angel were to suddenly appear and manifest themselves in front of you, you would struggle to stay on your feet and not fall down and worship him, because it would be a celestial being. And us as humans, we can't cope with that. We are creatures who are made to worship, and we will worship something. It's what you choose that something to be.
Well, the book will carry on with the next chapter, the shocking alternative.
Yeah, I think that what he writes in this chapter, The Invasion, really does matter. What he writes matters in terms of setting out everything. His argument isn't just some sort of bizarre, abstract theological claim here. He's given quite a deep and reasoned response to competing worldviews. He's presenting Christianity now against dualism. He's asserting that evil isn't just a co-equal with good, but it's a corruption of it. He's setting Christianity up against atheistic existentialism, such as Nietzsche or Sartre would have put out. And he's arguing that moral law is real and comes from God. He's also setting Christianity up now against secular humanism, warning that moral relativism can't actually sustain a just society. And then he's aligning himself with people like Augustine, Immanuel Kant, Tolkien even, and defending a Christian worldview that sees the universe as fundamentally good, though presently under enemy occupation. And so we need this invasion. And Jesus has been dropped in like a special forces operative behind enemy lines.
He also says, beware of being too simplistic, but it has to be simplistic in the nature of the writing of the book, ironically.
Yeah.
Although the reason I see that is being useful because Ludwig Wittgenstein, in his Tractatus Philosophicus, talked about logic, and he gave this image of a ladder. And all the stuff that he was teaching beforehand is like the ladder. But when you get to the top, you no longer need the ladder, you get rid of it. And you just effectively then, you've got like your black belt, you can talk, and you don't have to keep talking about the stuff that you did before. So in a way, he's like ascending the ladder now, isn't he? He's still using the ladder and saying, don't be simplistic, but I have to be simplistic to explain this so you can understand.
You've got to move one hand onto the next rung and keep moving upwards, right?
Yeah.
And a ladder rung is quite a simplistic model.
Yeah.
But you've got to go along it. This is a very interesting book. He makes some very good argumentation for mere Christianity. And if you can get through the language and if you can understand the way that he writes and read him carefully and thoughtfully, you can get a lot of value out of it, and you'll see why what he says still matters. It really does. 80 odd years on.
It is 80 years, isn't it? Wow. Amazing.
Crazy.
Time does go,
Crazy,
doesn't it?
man. It's crazy.
All right.
Nice one.
We'll get on to the next chapter soon.
You take care, fella.